everyone. Welcome to another Optigo webinar. We will get started immediately. We have a very, very packed schedule agenda. First of all, let me introduce you to Adam and Phil, and they will take a moment to introduce themselves. My name is Ping. I am CEO of Optigo Networks. And Adam, you want to go next?
Hello, my name is Adam Rinderle. I'm a principal and founder of bluEvolution. We're a smart building technology consulting and design firm that works on behalf of real property owners and managers to help them better integrate their OT and IT environments. We focus a lot of our efforts on designing, future-proof IT architecture, and where necessary, implementing business processes that allow our customers to, better cost-effectively and securely integrate, technology into their buildings. We also support our customers in areas including cybersecurity audits, BACnet network designs, and managing projects related to the implementation of technology in their facilities. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm grateful to Optigo for the opportunity to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Phil.
Hey folks, I'm Phil Zito. I'm the founder and CEO of Building Automation Monthly. Thanks so much for being here. So real quick, we provide training that focuses on tasks that make businesses money. We focus on the profit generating tasks, and we train folks up to be able to execute those tasks. What I hope to deliver to you all today is I've got a lot of experience being in the field and having worked for large manufacturers doing system integration, building BACnet stacks, troubleshooting BACnet stacks, and all of that stuff in between. Hope to deliver really great value around that to all of you in the audience today. And I want to echo Adam in thanking Optigo for taking the thought leadership and stepping into this hole that has been BACnet education, and really appreciate you all putting this together. This is going to be awesome. Thanks so much for everyone for being here.
Thank you, Phil. We do have a third panelist or fourth panelist. Unfortunately, he's running late. His name is Andy McMillan. He's the president of BACnet International. His background, because we heard it on our practice run, he comes from an engineering background. He has both the technical and the business aspect. But hopefully he can join us shortly, and we'll let him introduce himself when he does come on. But it is our pleasure at Optigo to welcome Adam, Phil, and hopefully Andy very soon. I think these three panelists will help contribute to a really fruitful discussion about the future of BACnet. A few of the guidance here is, first of all, this video is recorded. It will be available online to everyone. So if you have colleagues, peers, friends who can make it, you'll be able to forward them the link. The other thing is, I think we've assembled a team here, a panelist that can really cover both the technical aspects, the business aspects, and last but not least, the people side of things. So let's go right into it. Our very first question is, again, our idea here is to really make sure that we focus on the future, right? There's a lot of problems, a lot of history, a lot of great stories in the world around BACnet and building automation. We will use this to help prove our point or talk about what we want to say, but really the conversation here is about the future of BACnet. So let's start with the market size, right? What is the BACnet market size? How is it changing? Is it changing? Is it accelerating? I think our folks here at Optigo had a chance to put together in the past a few studies that showed kind of the size of the market. Do we have that, Monica? Yeah. Adam, do you want to say perhaps, I mean, you've been in this industry for a little while. Are you seeing a change, an acceleration, a growth in the market, or shrinkage, or also, due to your opinion, on the market size? How much money is there involved in BACnet?
Well, I probably wouldn't be the best person to speculate, on the money part of it. Maybe when Andy gets on, he can touch on that. But what I have noticed, and obviously my experience is going to be anecdotal, but I do work with some very large real property owners, and what I've seen transition from maybe mid 2000s, where there was kind of this, I don't know if it was 50-50. It seemed like a 50-50 kind of running between LAN and BACnet, and then obviously you're still going to have Modbus and then some other secondary protocols. But what I've noticed is like BACnet has just moved well ahead. When we're working with vendors to put together specs for control systems, but rarely are we still requiring LAN, and that's only if we have a legacy system that we're trying to accommodate. So, native BACnet has become, I think, the dominant protocol in the industry, certainly from my experience, and that's what I see because of all the things that it offers. So it's kind of moved into a position that seems to be number one. And I think that all the statistics that the BACnet steering committee could provide you are gonna indicate that.
Adam, based on your customer base, are you able to give us a little bit more concrete information without any breach of confidentiality? How are your customers adopting BACnet? And again, from a market size and a growth in it. So directly to your customers, anything concrete you can tell us?
Yeah, I work with a large public holder of real estate, and they have a spec where it's a requirement to use BACnet, again, unless there's an exception that's made, but an exception has to be made to work with another protocol. BACnet MSTP, BACnet IP are what they're requesting for any new automation system. They don't yet require it for lighting or other things, but they are finding that vendors that are trying to differentiate themselves with their lighting products, and I know maybe we'll touch on that in a little bit, but are also incorporating BACnet, enabling it in their products. But my customers are actually putting the requirement to have BACnet enabled, at least building automation systems, in their procurement specifications.
Awesome, thank you. Phil, you want to give us? You've been in this market for quite a while. Tell us what you think of the market size.
So in my own personal experience, BACnet tends to, just raw numbers here, out of about 70 to 80% of the jobs is by default. And then as Adam mentioned, if there is another protocol, it's due to legacy protocols that exist on site. You're seeing in the market where you're having intelligence pushed further and further to the edge of devices, and BACnet does really well there because of its data model. It's got a strongly typed and formed data model, and it's also done really well, and I'm sure Andy will talk about this, with BTL, with its certification process. And so vendors have built up their BACnet stacks. So you have market, but then you also have products to address that market. You have a very broad set of products that embrace BACnet, and that seems to be one of the largest advantages they've had, is that product base for customers to go and sample from that adhere to the BACnet protocol.
Awesome. Here, just quickly, our team here at Optigo is just putting together some of the data we were able to gather in the last few months. This is the market size of BACnet from building automation point of view, I believe. So as we can see, there's a steady up to the right trend, and we're close to about in the mid 60% of building automation using BACnet. Now, again, this is based on information we were able to gather. For those who are not aware of this, this is some pretty solid numbers, and we see that continue to grow. Now, the other thing that's really important to note that this slide doesn't capture is that the market size of building controls, building automation is growing significantly year over year. So not only is BACnet growing in the share within that market, the market itself is also growing. So that's pretty exciting. We did get a message that Andy will be with us very, very shortly, so that's exciting. And we'll come back to discussion because I know Andy has some pretty good insight on that one. Let's jump to the next one. What do you think, Phil, we'll start with you, is a driver behind the growth in BACnet? Why? Yes, building automation is growing, and we can talk about that aspect of it, which I think most people know. One of the primary driver, at least in the last 10 years, was energy. But what else is driving the growth of building automation, building controls, and also BACnet hand in hand?
Okay. Yeah, so building controls seems to be growing in a response, when properly utilized, to the expertise that is leaving our field. Now, I know that sounds a little bit self-serving. I run an education business, but there is a gap in our field around skill set and folks who are both able to operate as well as execute BAS projects. So you've got that, and automation is one way you solve that as long as it's properly installed. BACnet is a protocol that, when properly configured, is very easy to work with. BACnet MSTP, BACnet IP, they've been around for a long time. Most manufacturers have built it in such a way that they are compatible with everyone else's version of BACnet, most I say. So you see that. And then I recall a time when I was working with a lighting manufacturer, and this is nothing proprietary, but was working with a lighting manufacturer, and they were looking at one protocol, which was not a BACnet protocol, and they were asking my thoughts on it, and I suggested that they go down the path of BACnet. And I said, if you want to work with all the other building automation devices that are out there, then make it easy on yourself and choose the protocol that has dominance. And so I think that's why you're seeing folks like audio visual providers, folks like lighting providers, folks like access control providers starting to adopt the BACnet protocol, because there's an installed base of BACnet devices, and it's much easier to do that linkage than try to do some sort of web API, which, let's be honest, most of us in the BAS field, we're programmers, but we're BAS programmers, graphical programming. We're not sitting there writing C# or Java code, and nor should we. That's not an effective use of our time. So that's why I see folks adopting BACnet, because it's already dominant in the market, and it allows you to have access to a channel that you may not have had access to in the past.
So Phil, to summarize what you said, even though those who have been using BACnet don't find BACnet easy, it is probably one of the easier protocol to use, which is one of the driver to growth in BACnet. Second is the openness of BACnet has led to an install base, which I know other folks will talk about that, but also this smartness to the edge, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Are very, very good points there. Adam, do you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, a little bit, I guess. I mean, I agree with what Phil was saying, but I think, on the BAS side, from what I've seen from, real property owners, is this desire to, no longer be locked into proprietary solutions, right? And they're expensive, they're difficult to manage, they're challenging to integrate to. It's not ideal. And so, BACnet provides a path away from that, at least in large part. And, I think that's why there's just a trend right now to removing proprietary equipment, as you're doing upgrades and new construction, and then replacing that with native BACnet ones. And predictably, that should lower the cost of service, enable competition to be able to service your controls, and also enable a greater range of products that you can integrate to your building automation system. And so, I think it's kind of obvious, and it just naturally flows then, that because, BACnet is recognized as perhaps the most interoperable and widespread protocol in automation, at least on the facility side. And because the BAS system, tends to be the core system in a building that other solutions or systems are trying to either acquire data from or integrate to, to achieve some other kind of function, then it creates a necessity for lighting manufacturers and other, now we're seeing building IoT solution providers enable BACnet in their products. So, it's having this sort of effect where there's all these hangers on, I guess, to the trend with BACnet kind of dominating in BAS pretty significantly. And so it's really pushing, the industry and all tangential industries as a whole towards at least enabling BACnet connectivity in their products.
Awesome. Actually, both Phil and Adam brought up lighting in your description. Personally, I've always been very interested to know if BACnet, for those who are not familiar with the BACnet story, BACnet started as an HVAC protocol, right? It was entirely for heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems. So those who have been following BACnet and building automation, we talk about lighting often, but is it an actual thing? Is it a fad? Is it something that's just cool to talk about, that we see on the cover of magazines and blogs, or is it actually a thing? Adam, you want to start? Is lighting becoming real? Building lighting, I should say.
Yeah, I think they're trying to make it real. I think what's going to determine how real it is how much value you're going to generate out of the data that you acquire. Obviously, lighting systems are a perfect opportunity to integrate sensors at low cost, at the individual ballast or some other kind of zone level control. And so you're able to get a lot of good data, obviously occupancy being the number one thing that people are looking for, but also temperature and lighting and other things like that. So they're in a great position to gather data. They need to get that data to an automation system to do things like temperature setbacks and some other things. I've seen that work recently. I supported a project where we were able to get a BACnet integration between a lighting system and have it provide setback recommendations to a tritium-based BAS system to drop a temperature, plus or minus 2 or 3 degrees, depending on what, they want to do there, and to try to drive energy savings. Now, this is a new thing, so we haven't been able to test the effectiveness of it. But if those kinds of projects, in my opinion, prove to be successful, then I think you're going to see, it becoming a requirement so that real property owners have the infrastructure in place to be able to do what they need to do. If you are spending $1 million upgrading lighting and you didn't take the time to put the right sensors in there and make sure that that solution has protocols that you're going to be able to integrate with in the future, you're really already setting yourself back, at the very beginning. So I think for a while, unless this proves to be ineffectual from a cost savings perspective, we'll continue to see it.
Adam, this example you gave, was it BACnet that they used for protocol? Communication protocol?
Well, the lighting system itself has its own wireless mesh network, like some kind of secure Zigbee type thing. But then that data was getting integrated to an appliance, which then was communicating a set point recommendation to the BAS system over BACnet IP.
Excellent, thank you. Phil, you have anything to add here?
So I'm on the fence. You have BACnet IP coming out of lights and you have it giving you temperature data, but you can go and have great differences in the temperature reading on a wall versus in the ballast. I think what Adam hit on with occupancy is a valuable point. I don't necessarily recommend doing data collection from the temperature and humidity and CO2 from the ballast. Now, with all that being said, does that provide enough of an ROI to justify getting over the past pains we've had working with lighting vendors and BACnet IP? Because I think if you've been in the industry for any amount of time, you can tell horror stories about improper implementations of BACnet through lighting manufacturers and it taking down whole networks and devices blinking like Christmas lights because they go on and off. And we've got all of that kind of historical fear in us as technical folks. And we're going to put our heads on the chopping block to recommend a solution that we haven't seen on the macro level be successful. That is what you're going up against, because the facility folks are often going to say to their service guy who's out there, hey, what do you think of this? And depending on his experience or her experience, they're going to say, well, I wouldn't touch that stuff. It's junk. Or, yeah, you should try it. We had a good experience with it. And until you get enough of a movement, I don't see how it's going to get massive adoption.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Well, we have Andy joining us. Andy, let's catch you up a little bit. Want to introduce yourself first?
So I'm Andy McMillan, President of BACnet International, and I have a long history on the technical side in data communications, both development and applications, as well as 10 years leading a company that did building automation solutions for large-scale property owners. Now heading up BACnet International, of course, my charter is to help people be successful in taking advantage of BACnet as they adopt it for their projects.
Thank you, Andy. Andy, actually, we're going to come back to a question. We're not too far behind anyway, so it's all good. In terms of market size change, Adam told us a little bit about how his experience with his customers, how BACnet is being standardized by some of his customers. Phil is seeing a growth in BACnet, particularly because of the data model, something that people can use and rely on. You as president of BACnet International, what are some of the points you can give us to show that the market size is growing. And by the way, we showed the audience a little graph that we compiled here showing that in the last 5 years, I think it went from low 50% to mid 60% in market size. And then again, the market itself is growing. So, Andy, up to you.
Sure. That general chart on the sort of the market share of BACnet International globally is a good data point. Another one is the pace at which companies are requesting and obtaining BACnet vendor IDs. It took 15 years to get to the 400th vendor ID. It took 5 years more to get to the next 400. And we're still on that pace over these intervening 2 years. So there's rapid adoption still within companies that have yet to bring products to market. Another metric is looking at how many new companies are bringing products into the listing and certification program. And I think in just the last quarter, there were 17 companies that brought products to the listing program for the first time.
Nice.
So there's a continued growth on the supplier side, and that's driven, of course, by demand on the user side.
Can you say a few words about these type of products? Are they still traditional HVAC products or not?
Yeah, there's a wide variety. There's a whole group of products which have been produced over the years by controls companies that get used for multiple things. But there are also some specialized products. The specifically elevator controls is a relatively new phenomenon that we've seen listed and certified. And there are a bunch of lighting controls that have been listed and certified over the years. And we're beginning to see the lighting controls that incorporate the new BACnet lighting objects that make BACnet even more directly capable of managing lighting the way people expect lighting to be managed.
Thank you, Andy. Let's move on to the next question. I think it's and it's an interesting one. We were preparing on Monday. There's a lot of discussion out in boiler rooms and out to the web around MSTP, the future of MSTP compared to BACnet over IP. And I will make it even broader as we talked about it on Monday. Let's make sure that we don't just talk about 2-wire RS-45 compared to Cat5, but also open it up entirely. Let's start with Andy here. He just joined us. What is in your opinion, is MSTP going to survive in the next 10 years, or we're going to continue to deploy it? Of course, they're going to remain in the walls unless people rip it out. But are we going to continue to see it deployed? Is it going to diminish? Is it going to go away completely? What are we moving over to? Is it BACnet over IP over Cat5?
I think today BACnet IP over Cat5 gives you a certain price performance point. MSTP gives you a very different price performance point, and both those are important in different applications. So for the moment, people use both, and that's why. Wireless is going to create another set of price and application points as wireless becomes more acceptable both from a security point of view and a deployment point of view. And so as those wireless price performance points play out, MSTP and BACnet IP Cat5 are going to be affected in ways that are kind of hard to predict. Personally, I think MSTP is going to be around for a long time yet, because I think the specific things it addresses are not the focal points of people developing other technologies right now.
Thank you, Andy. Phil, what do you think?
So
you have a good angle.
What's that?
I said on Monday you had a pretty solid angle on this one.
Are you talking about the expertise aspect?
Yeah, sure.
So you see all these manufacturers roll out IP controls, and they're all doing it in response to a manufacturer who started rolling out IP controls, getting it flat spec'd, and then being able to win jobs. And so everyone else responds, and hey, we need a product that counters this, create BACnet IP. I mean, we don't even have really controllers out there that take super great advantage of this. We're just starting to see the first generation. And one of the biggest issues you're running into is in the rush to get this out to the market, organizations haven't trained their folks on IT. I mean, that's why you say the word IP address and folks on average start freaking out, because they haven't been educated on IP technologies, subnets, networks, VLANs, all that fun stuff. And because they haven't been educated on that, in my opinion, is going to be the biggest barrier, because price point isn't, depending on which architecture you use for IP, ring, bus, star, etc., you can deal with price point, you can deal with switch management. I mean, you guys at Optigo have a solution for going and doing OT networks that can handle most parts the IT conversation. So you can deal with that. But if the folks don't have the comfort level to go and execute projects and you start affecting the profit margin of the folks who are executing, they're not going to go and install the product. And that's what you're seeing. They're going to lose their butts because they don't have the expertise to profitably execute on that product line on the macro level. I mean, sure, individual shops do, but that is the biggest barrier, in my opinion, to adoption of IP technologies.
Interesting. So Andy touched on the price points, really the compromises between performance and price and deployment. Phil, you touched on skills, and you're both saying that because of those reasons, you believe MSTP is going to stick around for a while, perhaps for different reasons, for both reasons. Adam, what do you think? And I'd like you to add maybe a note. Some of these manufacturers are introducing power over Ethernet, PoE-enabled devices, VAVs to other things. So your view on MSTP, your view on IP, wireless, and perhaps add your view on PoE.
Sure. So, I'm kind of in line with the overall point of view that you just heard. I mean, I think MSTP is going to be around for a while. I mean, I think most people are going to look at the value proposition of, when you go down to that secondary level, the MSTP level, and converting that to IP or even Ethernet, but IP, and you're going to look at the cost associated with that, especially if you're moving to PoE, and there's just not going to be the bang for the buck there. Now you're implementing, all this network infrastructure, switches, cabling. You run into a new problem with cabling where Ethernet cable has a much shorter attenuation and serial cables. So you have MSTP devices that are somewhat geographically dispersed. So now you're probably looking at, in a lot of facilities, larger ones anyway, having to bring in fiber optics. Now you're really getting it over your head. So there could be applications where it's warranted and justified. Like there could be, applications related to life safety or security where, you need higher bandwidth and they're doing more things. But for the most part, I think the advantages of using IP and BACnet are going to be at the supervisory and application level, data processing and that kind of thing. And so, a lot of people think that to go more, technologically advanced is an advantage, but I don't think it always is. If it's not broke, don't fix it sometimes. And the point that Andy made about wireless, that's where I think it's going to jump. But people are going to want to install a bunch of Ethernet networks in their buildings and then rip them out 10 years later to put in wireless mesh networks, which is probably where we'll go with the next generation of MSTP type devices. So, that's my take. And of course, once you start putting all these big networks in, they're a bear to manage and they're very expensive. They're way more expensive to manage an MSTP, which requires almost no management. So the points about training and long-term operating costs should, I would think, except for some rare exceptions, scare people away from taking IP down to the secondary network level.
So if I could add one more thought, the one thing that I think we need to take into account in this is the potential for an emerging demand for endpoint security, right? One of the things that IP gives you is a very IT-centric standard security model. And I could see over the next few years, depending on how things develop, a push more and more to drive that IP level security down to the endpoints. And I still think the way it would get there is wireless, not necessarily driving Cat5 down to those endpoints, but that might speed up the transition to IP throughout, faster than I would otherwise expect.
Andy, actually, would you add a few words on wireless and what BACnet International is and BACnet standard maybe working on?
Right, the BACnet standard has provision for operation over IPv4 or IPv6. So any platform that supports IPv4 or 6 is a potential physical or logical layer for BACnet, and people do that today with Wi-Fi and fiber and Cat5. Yep. They can just as easily do it over IPv6 mesh networks, which are being developed right now. In fact, I know the Thread group has developed a IPv6 thread or mesh network, which in principle you could run BACnet over because BACnet runs over IPv6. So as people start building automation products on those kinds of wireless technologies, you can get endpoint to endpoint security of the IT class and IT type. And that may prove to be a significant draw for people as cybersecurity becomes more and more an issue.
Wonderful. Before we jump to the next one, we did say quite a few things to show that MSTP will stick around. But at least from an Optigo point of view, we can see a decent adoption of BACnet over IP, and actually, to be more exact, BACnet over Ethernet, Cat5. So maybe take a second each and say, Adam, you said there are some exceptions or some cases where BACnet over Ethernet, over Cat5, I should say, is warranted. Maybe can we say a few things about when is it appropriate to consider those? Adam, you want to start?
Well, one of the advantages of IP is it gives you a little bit better ability to remotely support devices, right? You get a little more information. You're able to provide better control when you can remotely manage things. So I can see where that would be an opportunity if there's a particular device or group of devices that you want to have that level of control over. Or if you already have robust Ethernet networks, throughout a building, maybe there's an office building and they have Cat5e or Cat6 cable that they can leverage, and they're not in a traditional situation where you have, and this might be more for building IoT. So if you're putting in gateways and controllers, that you have the option to do like a Modbus or backend MSTP type integration, you might choose to use Ethernet. So if there's real cost savings opportunities there, then in those particular cases, then I can see people leveraging it. It's not bad. It just increases the responsibility and the cost associated with that. So it really is just a straight value proposition in terms of the return you're going to get for the increased cost of putting in even an Ethernet network.
Excellent, thank you, Phil.
Yeah, I'm going to make a couple assumptions, and one, I will assume that you can get the local electrical union to agree with you using low voltage labor instead of high voltage labor. And so you got that when you're running your Ethernet cables, because that's going to be a cost that you have to deal with. Assuming you can do that, and assuming that you can do a bus or a ring network, I think the price point discussion is negligible at best. And then you go, does the executing outfit have the IT expertise? Does the customer have enough comfort with IT and the perceived vulnerabilities? I still think that there's way worse vulnerabilities than the IP aspect that we don't deal with as an industry. So if you can get the electrical cost low enough, and you can use a bus or a ring pattern, which is different than the star pattern, which is end-to-end run, if you can deal with that, and you can deal with the last thing, which is IP controls requires power to the controller so the controller can process the packet and then send it on to the next controller. MSTP doesn't require that because the electricity is on the signal wire. If you could deal with those three issues, I don't see any reason not to use IP at the field bus layer, but those issues are big issues.
Thank you. Andy, before I go to you, I think one thing that we are seeing, one of the driver behind higher performance is analytics. More and more demand for analytics, and MSTP often, the loops are pushed so high, 32 devices plus, and then you add analytics after you've built the system, it chokes everything down. So I can say that, at least from what we see, again, through the two product lines that we offer, we see a lot of support questions because, a system that was put in, it works perfectly fine, and they decide to put analytics, real-time analytics, for whatever reason it is, and suddenly the system can no longer support it. So, Andy, back to you. You can add to what I said or your angle on the driver behind BACnet over IP over Cat5 particularly.
Sure. Well, the starting point for price performance is what performance do you need? And if you need the performance of high bandwidth, then you need to do some form of IP, whether it's Cat5 or wireless or whatever. I do think people that designed a network to do one thing and then come back later and want the network to do something else, like do controls, now I want real-time analytics, have two challenges. One, the network wasn't designed for that, so you need to look at it and make sure it will do it. But the second is you need to do the analytics piece with knowledge of the limitations of the network. So, for example, if you have set up your network with devices that don't have efficient transfer mechanisms for blocks of data, or you didn't use those transfer mechanisms for control because you didn't need to, maybe you should be paying attention to things like, change of value notifications instead of reading it every second, or things like that. So you have to be more sophisticated in your use of the capabilities of the devices that you have, and your devices have to have those capabilities if you want to take a network designed for control and suddenly say we're going to do analytics, and you really ought to check that real-time analytics is what you really want. That's sort of an interesting buzzword, but there are very few temperatures that change fast enough that you want to measure them every second. And so if you're doing that, maybe you're putting a burden on yourself you don't need.
Excellent. Let's move on to something else. A few of you already mentioned the word cybersecurity. Anyone who's been keeping up with the smart building industry, BACnet, any form of IoT, cybersecurity is probably the hottest topic around. Obviously, the target story is getting a little old, but what is cybersecurity? How does it apply to BACnet? What do we do about it? Is it something? Is it important? Do we have to care about it? And perhaps if anyone has some remedy or suggestions on how to deal with that. We'll start with Adam on this one.
Thanks, Ping. Well, I guess I see sort of a present case scenario and a future scenario when we talk about cybersecurity for BACnet. I think the biggest security challenges that you're going to have as a building operator or a user of a control system is your people, who are following the right processes and standards, and I'm sure everybody's going to agree with that. And then the products that you're installing, so the hardware and software, the firmware on the hardware device, the application, the operating system on the servers that you're using. I think that's where your primary risk is going to be. And so and I'm sure Andy will touch on this, but if what the BACnet Steering Committee is doing to improve BACnet security, I think it will, improve the adoption of more secure products, and it will push industry. But beyond that issue, beyond default passwords and all of the sort of kind of high-level stuff, the low-hanging fruit that we can try to fix. If we look at hacking just in general, I think it's right now, at least, it's more likely that hackers are looking to exploit vulnerabilities on a Linux or a Microsoft operating system, or a lack of security in web services, something like that, than they are trying to spend time to write malicious code to target, a BACnet stack, right? I think that's, if we're just trying to be realistic about it. But over time, as more devices are incorporating BACnet, like lighting and other things, then you're increasing the opportunities for ransomware attacks. And there's been some white hat type things where they've taken control of lights, and then you really are into a major problem there as a building operator if your entire lighting system is now owned by somebody else. So I think there's a responsibility that the standard has to continue to make BACnet more secure, but I think the focus immediately should be on other things as far as the actual operating systems, the users, and those kinds of things.
Before we go to Andy next, a couple of points I just want to add is BACnet is a fantastic protocol. It's been around for a long time, and again, as many of us pointed out, it has a pretty wide base of adoption. But when it comes to cybersecurity, on the technology side, there's two primary components protecting it, which is one is authentication, username, password. Can you access a BBMD, for example? Can you access a controller? And if you do you need a username, password? Right? Our own smartphones, if you hand it to someone else, they won't be able to access it unless they know your code or they have your iris scan or whatever it is. And the second is encryption. So even if someone was able to intercept information being sent between a VAV and a controller or a server? Could they modify it and make it respond something different? Those two aspects are unfortunately not part of the BACnet protocol as it is deployed today. So Andy, to you now, in terms of the future, what is BACnet International, BACnet standard doing about that?
Well, the BACnet committee, right, which is operated by ASHRAE and actually drives evolution of the standard, has gone through a public comment session just the last couple of months on an extension of BACnet called BACnet Secure Connect. And BACnet Secure Connect is designed to address specifically those two issues for the applications that need it. And it's probably, I would go into the next round of revisions over the fall and be out for public comment again by the end of the year, I would guess. But it's targeting exactly that problem, authentication particularly, but also encryption, and building that into a solution that, when it's combined with the proper processes and procedures, changes the level of security of the building automation system as a freestanding solution. Right now, historically, that wasn't so important because the building automation solution was isolated from anything else, so it wasn't an issue. And you protect it with a firewall or two, it's still isolated. But more and more, we want to connect pieces of the building automation outside of the building automation world, and those additional holes, if you will, in the walls are what are leading to the demand for thinking about endpoint-to-endpoint security, which is driving BACnet Secure Connect. So it's a response to a change in the requirement space. It's not that existing systems aren't secure, it's that they're secured by sort of today's level of system level security, right? Firewalls at the edges, and if people pay attention to things like passwords and authentication that's available in the devices, then they're fine. But the world's changing, and as it changes, we need more than that. And that's what BACnet Secure Connect is designed to address.
Thank you, Andy. Andy, if people wanted more information on this BACnet SC, BACnet Secure Connect, where could they go?
The simplest thing would be to send an email to info@bacnetinternational.org, and we'll route them to the right place, whether it's right to the committee or to a white paper or whatever it is we interpret their need to be.
Wonderful. We do have a page that will be posted near the end of the webinar with these email addresses and links. Phil, out to you now for your comment on cybersecurity with BACnet.
Okay. So my experience with cybersecurity is a little bit of what Adam said, a little bit of what Andy said, and a little bit of just field experience. So assuming that you don't have the BAS server under the desk and you're using passwords, the point of BACnet cybersecurity right now, what I've seen our industry do time and time again is react to the 0.01% and implement security from that perspective. So I think we need to look at what our actual risk level is. If I'm a commercial office building and I have 3 floors filled with cubicle farms and a smart rooftop and a couple thermostats, my level of security I need is much lower than, say, the Pentagon. So the problem as an industry is, how are we going to have a scalable security standard that is not going to make it so much harder for us in the industry to go and implement? Because while Andy and the team at BACnet International, I'm sure, are going to do a great job of implementing the stack securely, at the end of the day, it's implementation of the products that are going to make things secure or not. And if we make it so hard for the field to go out and install stuff securely, then we're just going to do the easiest thing we could do. We're going to open all ports on the firewall because we can't get our server to talk to the supervisory device. We're going to go and get TeamViewer because IT won't give us VPN access to the site, and we're going to set up a TeamViewer account. We're going to be looking at ESPN on the BAS server when it's March Madness, rather than using it as a dedicated. I mean, let's be real. And so those are all security vulnerabilities. I don't think that's Andy's job to solve those.
Well,
so there's like the rub.
Yeah, that's a great way
to hear that.
Unless you want to go and get everyone to turn off ESPN in the middle of March. I don't think that's going to work.
Vegas won't like you for that. That's a great lead into our last question. And we all talked about this quite a bit already. And it's about the human aspect, the training, the labor. I think many of us touched on we have to learn more. We have to learn about IT. We have to learn about cybersecurity. We have to learn about these procedures and protocols. But also the other aspect of it is we all know that finding skilled labor, people who know how to do programming or building automation, who understand BACnet, understand LAN, understand how to work with customers and how BACnet interacts with IT, how OT and IT, you know, and we all talked about how it's going beyond HVAC, right? We will have to hire people to not only just understand, you know, humidity and air pressure, but also understand lumens and understand elevators. I can't even comment on that one, right? So we will leave that Phil to last on that one. We'll start with Andy. In terms of how do we help our community grow, right? Bigger community, get more people in it, and how do we get them to learn about get the knowledge that we need to move forward in the next 10, 20 years?
That's a really good question, and I think it's central to what we're trying to do. Part of making the community bigger is helping people get started. And for years, people have asked, so how do I get started with BACnet? Where do I go to learn the first thing? How do I enter? So one of the things that BACnet International has done in the last 2 years is put together the BACnet Institute, which is an online learning and information platform to allow people to enter the BACnet community and then grow in the BACnet community with a whole set of resources for education and information. Right? There are online courses there. The one that's up there now is called BACnet Basics. It's a way to get people initiated into the BACnet community. There's a library of 150 or so white papers and articles and videos and presentation documents that are all curated and filtered so people can learn what they want to learn. And then there's a technical forum where people can get involved and ask questions of each other that we moderate and help ensure people get quick answers and correct answers. So the BACnet Institute is one part of it. But another part of it is educating the industry more broadly, talking to editors and helping people understand and translate what they think they know into commercial building reality. For example, you know, the commercial general consumer understanding of IoT, right? It's Alexa on your counter and your light bulb goes on when you ask her to turn it on. And we all know that the requirements for that residential application are different than the requirements for a commercial building. So we talk IoT in a commercial building. People need to think about building IoT, not consumer IoT, and educating people, helping the community understand that kind of thing so that we have a forward-looking implementation of IoT technologies that preserves, for example, the vendor interoperability that we don't have in residential between the Amazon parts and the Google parts and the coming Microsoft parts. And we've solved that problem in buildings. We need to stay solved in buildings. So the requirements there are different. Educating the community on what they should really expect from commercial building automation going forward is, I think, part of our challenge. And
Great.
The BACnet Institute is part of that, but there's a broader need to talk in the community and through the other vehicles that people look to for information.
That's excellent. Again, everyone, we will have a resource page with the link to BACnet Institute. That's really wonderful, Andy. Thank you and to you and your community for doing that. Adam, out to you. How do we get people trained up more?
Well, I know obviously we're going to hear more from Phil on the training, and I would just say that I agree that training is obviously very important. I guess two things I can bring up. One is with one of the organizations that we support, you know, a larger organization. There was, you know, you have legacy BACnet, and then you're trying to combine that with new BACnet and BACnet IP. You got, you know, BACnet at the LAN level, and then the WAN level. It can get, you know, depending on the size of your organization, it can get pretty crazy. So what we did for them was to establish a BACnet steering committee. So we took the most knowledgeable folks in their organization to come together. We actually had someone at the very beginning when we formed, Steve Bushby, and another gentleman from Cornell that came and kind of talked to us a little bit. We had some unique challenges. They volunteered their time, and that kind of got us rolling. And then we meet on a biannual or quarterly basis and try to come up with some strategies that are going to help us, manage the BACnet that is already implemented, and then how we're going to treat that going forward. So that's one thing anybody can do. Really, I'm not going to say for free, but at low cost within your organization, and then documenting those findings for the folks that are going to be stakeholders in that, but that don't necessarily have the time to attend the meetings. The other thing I'll say is, there really is, I think it's talked about a lot. You go to different conferences, you don't have to read too much to identify that we have a skills gap in this industry that's evolving from a straight, OT controls type skill set to being increasingly needing people that have that hybrid skill set of an IT professional with targeted knowledge in areas of controls. And I think it's going to take some time until the industry can develop, people within their organizations to, have that skill set like in mass. And I think that in the meantime, at least, to fill that gap, some real property owners are going to have to rely on contracted services. That's an area that, my company is trying to get into as far as trying to provide people that have a strong skill set in IT that are trained up in areas of building controls, either specific to the applications that they're running. Obviously, a lot of knowledge about BACnet, or maybe LAN if that's what they're dealing with. But trying to find someone that can be plugged in right now, that has that expertise, that can meet the daily requirements, and then also help to provide knowledge to others that they're working with, so that it kind of rubs off. That's, I think, a service that a lot of commercial real estate owners are going to be able to benefit from here in the next 5 to 10 years, until the industry really fully evolves educationally.
Excellent. So grow within. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you. Phil, to you. If you're too ashamed to say it, I will say, for those who are not aware, Phil has a great service, really, educating well beyond BACnet. But Phil, what is your view on how can we help produce more people and get the people to know more?
So first off, thanks, Ping. I really appreciate that. We've been blessed to have companies trust us with several thousand students, and that's given us a perspective of, and you all are going to want to write this down. I'm going to give you our secret sauce here. So you write this down, this will make you money. All right. Focus on the tasks. Don't focus on the people. I mean, everyone's looking for this kind of uber tech. I mean, you look at the job descriptions out there, and it's crazy what folks expect. The reality is there's just a handful of tasks that are going to generate the majority of your profit within your business, that are going to result in your margin growth, your operational efficiency. And if you can figure out these tasks, then you can focus on developing skills for those tasks. And it's kind of that Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. And what a lot of folks don't even know what those tasks are, first off. So you got to figure out those for your organization. Once you've done that, you need to assess your team based on those tasks and make sure that they can do those things. And then find the lowest skill person within your team and develop them to the highest skill they can for the highest profit or highest efficiency tasks you can. That will take a lot of burden off your team. Cash solves almost all problems. So the more cash you can generate, the better and more flexible your organization will be. I mean, that's the secret. That's our business model. We identify profitable tasks. We teach students those tasks. Those students go back to their businesses. They make money for the business. The business goes and puts more students in our programs. But I mean, that's something you can do internally. You can go and figure out your tasks, assess your team, and then you can go with that assessment result, train up your team to those tasks. That's what we do. That's how our program works. But as I mentioned, you can do that internally. It's just taking the time and having the focus to go and do that, and having the processes in place as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. We're going to move on. We have 4 minutes. We have some amazing questions. I'd like to start with perhaps Andy. what is your view, or what is BACnet? How is BACnet aligning with analytics? For example, fault diagnostics. How is BACnet aligning with some of these smarter applications, right? Some of these machine learning kind of aspects of things. Maybe give us your comment on that.
Yeah, BACnet was originally constructed to address a set of applications in control and monitoring. As we move to analytics, it needs additional capability, and the committee has worked on those and has published in part of those as new sections in the standard. And those are largely dealing with metadata and semantics, so that you can better identify what is the data that you're collecting, and then analytics tools can automatically deal with that. But if you don't do those analytics based on metadata and a well understood semantic model, then you have to individually map those data points into common forms, and that's such a huge amount of work, it makes analytics very expensive. By adding semantics directly into the controllers, or at least into the system, if not the controllers, you can start to make that much more automatic and therefore far more cost effective. And that's what we're going to see over the next few years, is far more cost effective analytic solutions.
That's awesome, Andy. Thank you very much. And thank you to Luke for the excellent question. And it actually leads perfectly into the next question, which is tagging with BACnet. Actually, let's see, Phil, are you able to help us there, or Adam? I'm not too familiar with I mean, I know tagging, but how BACnet is dealing with it. Perhaps, Phil, can you give us a few words? And it's a great question from Sean here.
Yeah, so tagging, when most folks refer to tagging, they're talking about the metadata of Haystack, the whole Haystack model. Basically, there's two kind of problems. First off, having an API where you can consume data from a BACnet system that developers can work with. And then assuming that that exists, they then need some form of data model that they can utilize their common tools, for example, JavaScript object notation, which is JSON. They need to be able to have a key value model. That's what tagging is. Tagging is where you have a series of keys, and then that key has a value. So for example, I would say I have a Honda, that's a manufacturer, and its model is a Pilot. And I could say it's year, and then you guys would laugh at how old it is. But that is the tagging process. Now, by doing that, what you're enabling manufacturers to do, as well as developers to do, they're able to understand the system. And the whole principle of tagging is getting a common set of definitions, so that when you ping, say, AHU, it means the same thing to Adam, it means the same thing to Andy as well. We get that in place, we get a strong API, a strong tagging model, then that has us all speaking the same language. It makes automation easier, programming easier. I don't know if that's the path that the person who asked the question was looking for, but that is essentially tagging and the business value behind it.
So to add to this, Haystack is growing, but officially speaking, Haystack is not directly associated with BACnet. Nope. Is there something native to BACnet to handle tagging?
That's an Andy question.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a recent press release that the committee established to deal with semantics and semantic modeling for BACnet is working with Haystack. And the model developed and published with BACnet accommodates Haystack precisely. Now, it also allows other models. If someone wants to develop something that is different than Haystack, that's perfectly fine. But the Haystack model and the BACnet infrastructure have been designed to be compatible, and that's a deliberate effort of those two groups to work together.
Excellent. So I'll just add the last point. For those who are not familiar with Haystack, check out Haystack. I don't exactly remember the URL. They do have a bi-yearly conference called Haystack Connect, small, intimate, very, very good, very technical conference. And last question, Adam, to you. This is an interesting question. Again, it's from Juan. We're starting to see some devices that are multi-protocol. So this example here was particularly some devices that could handle both BACnet and LAN at once. Do we see that as a competition to BACnet? Is this a good thing, a bad thing? Would it be welcomed to this community?
Well, I mean, anytime you have more functionality, unless that's coming at some, extreme cost. So, again, it's about value proposition. I would say it's generally good. Obviously, like, I'm not trying to pick on any one brand, but Jaces, they can be branded by a lot of different manufacturers, have had the capability to do that for a while. I mean, usually I think what you're trying to do there is say, okay, I have a legacy LAN network, and I'm trying to enable like a front end system that's BACnet based. So that's a great bridge. It's very difficult, as I'm sure everybody in this call knows, when you're trying to upgrade from one proprietary system to an open BACnet system or any other system. Doesn't matter, obviously, but it's expensive. I mean, it could be in the millions of dollars. So the majority of these kinds of projects are sort of iterative, and you're trying to find bridges to the future. It's very difficult to come up with the money to do it all at once unless this is ground up construction. So if a device that enables LAN and BACnet helps you bridge to the future, in either direction, I guess. But I do think that I'm not picking on LAN, but I do feel like BACnet really is where you're going to want to be in 10 years. I don't think there's any harm in it. It just, it kind of has its functional place, and that would make sense to me as a good functional place for a tool like that. But, you start to get into having the right drivers and all these different things that have been the bane of this particular industry, people talking about how interoperable, their products are across protocols, and I've been exposed to almost all of them, and it's very few people can kind of put their money where their mouth is, and they talk about the drivers they write and how interoperable they really are. So recommend consulting with some experts in that space before you just kind of buy an assertion that it's going to work the way they say out of the box. It usually does not.
That's wonderful. Well, we're going to cut it short here. We are aware that there's a ton of questions. We're going to try to get back to them. I know from the help with Andy, Adam, and Phil, we will get back to you hopefully individually on your questions. So thank you very, very much for the active participation. It's much appreciated. Thank you to the three of you. It's really great to have you on. Hopefully this helped everyone get a sense of where BACnet is, how it's growing, what are some of the challenges ahead, how we can deal with it. Last but not least, we're going to put up one last slide with a bunch of resources that were mentioned during this webinar. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can redirect your questions to, again, Phil, Adam, Andy, or anyone else we think could help you there. Good luck, everyone. Thank you very much to the three of you again. Have a great rest of the summer. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.